Robertson.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. Yesterday, when John Key spoke in Parliament, he told us that a society is judged on how it protects the vulnerable. It perhaps won't surprise members in the House that he didn't get the quote quite right. The quote comes from an American politician named Hubert Humphrey, and he said that the test of the morality of a society is how it looks after those in the dawn of life, the twilight of life, and the shadows of life. And if we put the national government's record to that test, Mr Speaker, in just one sector of our society, the health sector, we can see a total failure by the national government. If we look at those in the dawn of life, the young, today in question time, I raised with Tony Ryle whether or not it's acceptable of their weekly family grocery bill on a visit for an after-hours treatment for a cut lip for that person's daughter. Is that acceptable? 20% of that family's weekly grocery bill spent on one visit to after-hours care. And this from a government who said that under-sixes and the treatment of our young children would be a priority. So those in the dawn of life are not receiving the kind of treatment in the health sector that we would expect. Research last year told us that there were 2,000 more admissions from children to hospital in 2009 than there were in 2007. 2,000 extra admissions to hospital for diseases, many of which were preventable. If the government's prepared to invest in primary health care, if the government's prepared to invest in the well-being of our young people, the fact that we have rheumatic fever in New Zealand at all is a disgrace. We need investment in those in the dawn of life, because that is a test of the morality of the government, and what we have seen from this government is that they are failing that test. And again we see it with the cuts to early childhood education as well. Young people are being left behind in the health system because Mr Ryle is obsessed by his focus on elective surgery. He's obsessed by looking good in this House when it comes to the health sector, but the reality for someone like that young family on the Kapiti Coast is that the health costs they are facing end up putting them and other families in a situation where it's a choice between food on the table or health treatment. Well, in this country we do have choices, Mr Speaker. That government had choices, and they chose to give tax cuts to the top 10% of earners, weighted towards the top 10% of earners. They could have made a choice to invest in health and education, to ensure that care for under-sixes can be free for those people all around New Zealand, but they made a choice to give those tax cuts to the highest income earners. And also, if we take Hubert Humphrey's quote further, those in the twilight of life, the elderly, the record on elder care in the health sector from this government is appalling. I could not believe that in New Zealand, a country like New Zealand, I would have a constituent come to me about her 92-year-old father, a World War II veteran, who had had his home help cut over the phone. Home help cut over the phone. This man has hearing difficulties, sight difficulties, and his home help was cut over the phone. That's not the kind of New Zealand I want to live in. I want to live in a New Zealand where we look after each other, where we make a priority of looking after one another, not a priority of rewarding the top 10% of earners with a tax cut that they did not need. So those in the twilight of life have not been treated well by this government. What about those in the shadows of life? And by this I take it to mean people, for instance, who are those receiving care under the mental health system. What kind of treatment have they seen from this government? Cuts to funding right around New Zealand for mental health. Here in my own area, the Capital Coast District Health Board in Wellington have cut mental health funding over the last 2 years. That means that 2 community clinics in Wellington City will close this year. 2 mental health community clinics will close this year. It means that right across the health sector, NGOs who provide vital support to people in our community are losing money. An organisation like the Phobic Trust, run by a wonderful woman named Marcia Reid, who's been lauded by parties on both sides of this House, loses a funding contract here in Wellington to support people with phobic disorders. Is that the kind of country that is a country that has a good morality? That's the kind of message the government is sending. They are failing the test of looking after the vulnerable. They are failing the moral test of a government to look after its citizens in the dawn of life, the twilight of life and the shadows of life. And that is a shame upon this government. And it is more evident than anywhere else in the health sector. Because, Mr Speaker, it is a question of priorities. The government's already said that they are going to cut the spending allowance in the next budget down to $800 million extra spending. If the health budget stands still, it will take up $600 million of that $800 million. If it stands still, actually that's still not enough. And in fact, over a 4-year budget cycle, which the government likes to do its budget on, there will be a $750 million hole in the health budget. One whole year's worth of new health spending will have gone across those 4 years. That will inevitably lead to more service cuts. It will inevitably lead to more pressure on DHBs not to provide those services to the young, to the elderly, to those in mental health. And that is not good enough, Mr Speaker, because the kind of country that I want to live in is one where we invest in health and education. It's one where we actually make the choice to say we will look after our fellow citizens to enable them to achieve their potential, whoever they are and wherever they are from. And instead we have a message from John Key. And his message is that he cares more about the private insurers who are going to benefit out of the ACC privatisation. He cares more about the top 10% of income earners. He cares more about foreign investors who are going to get hold of our state assets than he does about ordinary New Zealanders. The message to New Zealanders is that John Key does not care about you. He cares about all of those other people, the foreign investors, the overseas-run insurance companies, because that's where the value is going in New Zealand today. That's the value that's been put on this. It's the accountant's view, the cost of everything and the value of nothing. That's the message that's coming out of John Key. Not all accountants, Mr Mallard. But from a Labour point of view, what we want to focus on in this term is about investing in our future. Because it's vitally important that when the people of New Zealand see the choices being made by the national government, that they know that there are other choices that can be made. They know that it's possible to invest in our future through a relentless focus on children. And I totally reject what Heather Roy said in this House today. Annette King is bringing forward a program on investing in the early years that will make a fundamental difference to the future of New Zealand. It's not about putting an ambulance at the bottom of the cliff as the government would have with boot camps. It's about building those fences at the top to allow young children to flourish wherever they are and whatever families that they're born into. That is an investment in our future, and yes, it will take resources to do that. It absolutely will take resources to do that, but they are resources better spent there than they are on tax cuts to the top 10% of income earners. They are far better spent on investing in health and education. Because if we want to invest in our future, then we do need a fairer tax system. We need a system where people pay their fair share. It's not about punishing people for success. It's about encouraging success for everybody by ensuring that everybody pays a fair share as part of a fair tax system. It's about having a monetary policy that supports exporters, that actually says we want export growth. Where was the message on export growth in the Prime Minister's speech yesterday? Just words, no action on that. Mr Speaker, on this side of the House we know that when the Prime Minister comes down here to make a statement, he should be setting out a vision. He should be setting out his vision for the future of New Zealand. What we got yesterday was a directionless statement. The Prime Minister is all map and no compass. He's got all the polling, all the focus groups, but he's got no idea where he wants to take New Zealand. He has no vision for the future of this country. And this year, Mr Speaker, the Labour Party will be presenting a positive vision about investing in our future, investing in our young people, contrasted with a National Party that sees the cost of everything and the value of nothing.